All right, well, I will kick off and call the Concord School Committee meeting to order. I'll note that we're being recorded and broadcast via Zoom.
And I'll call the Concord-Carlisle Regional School Committee meeting to order.
Welcome, everyone. As we said a minute ago before opening, we're glad to have Kristen Herbert with us and Ruth Gruby. Anyone else? I think that's it in terms of speaking. I see a bunch of people watching also. So thanks for joining us. Let me see, we're starting with just some minutes. Did everybody have a chance to look over the minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I guess the first one is joint, right? Got too many browser windows open here. So can I have a motion to accept the joint meeting minutes for 4/16/20 and 4/28/20?
Moved.
Is that for both committees?
Sorry, thank you, for both committees.
Okay.
Second for both.
Thank you.
Any discussion on those?
Well, I had to look up the word predication, and it means announcement. And so it was in regard to the predication that $80 to $100 million estimate for the middle school. That was the only thing I double checked. I think everything's in accord, and I want to thank Aaron for putting all these together.
Yes, a lot of work. Thank you. Anything else? So by roll, Booth?
Aye for both.
Vote?
Aye for both.
Cynthia?
Aye for both.
David?
Aye for region.
And is Eva here yet? Johnston, aye for both. And moving on to the second item, can I have a motion to approve the executive session minutes from 2/25/20, 20, 4/16/20, 4/28/20, and 5/8/20 for both?
Move for both.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any
Great.
discussion on these? Hearing none, let's do another roll.
Well, yeah,
Booth.
Wally, I would only note that we're being rather efficient about getting these approved, but indeed, there's no time requirement for it. Really, we release these when it's okay to release them.
Yep.
Because of the nature of executive sessions. Okay.
Right. Good point.
So we're not running a clock on them. We just happen to be looking quite efficient on it right now.
Right. Oftentimes there are things that are ongoing that have to remain executive session. So Booth,
Aye for both.
Rainey,
Aye for both.
Bout,
Aye for both.
Modell,
Aye for region.
and Johnston, aye for both. Correspondence. Heather, do you have anything to bring
I
up
didn't
there?
have any CPS, I don't think. No.
We had a couple more emails about coaches since our last meeting. Same vein. And chairs and liaison reports.
Yeah, you know what? Why don't I do a quick just liaison report from the building committee here, because we're not going to talk about it in detail later. Just so that everybody knows, the building committee, when we met just yesterday morning, recommended taking a pause, basically temporarily stopping activity of the building committee for now. Brought that recommendation to the select board last night or yesterday afternoon, and the select board voted to suspend activity temporarily as we recommended. So in terms of what that means, it is, again, temporary suspension. It is very clear that the building committee and select board are still 100% behind executing a new middle school building in as soon a time frame as possible. But the rationale behind pausing temporarily is twofold. One is that we're at a point with the building committee now that it's time to do a lot of public engagement and get a lot of public input. And during this situation, that just isn't really possible. The second is that this financial situation is just uncertain enough that it doesn't seem like the right time to be asking for significant funding on a building, or really even asking people to weigh in on big questions about, adding extras like auditorium or gym that have financial implications, et cetera. So we basically want to wait a short time until the scenario is a little more clear. The committee leadership will be meeting monthly, at least, to reevaluate regularly and ensure that this is not an indefinite pause by any means, but we'll come back as soon as we possibly can. So that's the update there. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Heather, if I might add,
Yeah.
I think we can expect what we would term a preliminary feasibility report in about
Sorry,
2
thank
weeks.
you. Yes, I meant to mention that. Thank you.
And preliminary feasibility report would be probably the formal pause point, I suppose,
Yes.
notwithstanding the monthly meetings to check in on this. So that suggests that when we pick this back up, we'll complete that feasibility and then move promptly into schematic phase.
Exactly. Thank you. That will be completed before we officially pause. Anything else, Lori, that you would add to that I missed?
No, I think you've hit the highlights.
Okay. Great. And it was with the statement was just sent out with much appreciation for the building committee members, the designer team, our OPM, and all of the public who have shared input along the way already. That is all still critical and will be used as soon as we get going again. So thanks. That's the update there.
And, I would add, if there was any sentiment that the middle school reconfiguration was a bit much, given the fact that we had a new school in our sights, call us lucky or prescient, because we've got a good model working there now in those buildings, notwithstanding all the problems those buildings have.
Yep. Thank goodness.
True.
Okay. Any other lead reports?
So, go ahead.
Go, Cynthia, go ahead.
I was going to say the Finance Committee in Concord met last night. And while they didn't necessarily focus on school budget, they did have a sort of wide-ranging conversation about the town outlook. Not much of an update from what we last heard, and just individual Finance Committee members' outlook on the Concord and state economies. One thing that did come up is that the Pioneer Institute has unemployment by town in Massachusetts, and the rate in Concord is 21%, and Carlisle's around 20%. So that was, to me, kind of a interesting statistic.
It's a big number.
Yeah, I saw that data. And I mean, I think that adds, in fact, there's been some debate in Carlisle and ability to the fact that, and we should all be aware, I'm also saying the same to Carlisle School Committee, that this push for belt tightening is a real thing, and it's probably a prudent thing. So we just should be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. I was going to mention the 2 FinCon meetings, so thank you. And just also note that the town the moderator is likely to move out to a July focus on town meeting, but most likely into the fall, sometime after September 1st. And September 1st will be the next opportunity to see what tax receipts look like for town of Concord, which will be some real data versus projected. And it would be nice to have that before we had to put budgets in front of town meetings. And there at Carlisle is still working through how they're going to approach their town meeting. And there's really more on that to come as it affects budgets and the like. So we'll leave that alone for now.
But we did hear, did we not hear from the regional council and also Concord Council that no matter if, presuming that Concord agrees or everybody agrees to the 112th regional budget, that Carlisle would simply not move the article if they even had a town meeting?
I don't know.
That was guidance.
We're going to hear more about that on the item D, I think.
Yeah.
In discussion.
I'll go into that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. I believe the Carlisle FinCom met last night and also voted to go to the 112th, I believe.
Yeah.
I wasn't at the meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll get into that. So anything else on liaison reports? Take it away, Lori.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to offer, thank you. I just wanted to offer some updates on especially the high school class of 2020 and the activities and events that are planned for them. First and foremost, we'll be getting going on a number of different ways to recognize them. The high school administrators, starting tomorrow, will be in a school bus dropping off individual lawn signs to every high school senior. It's not all going to get done tomorrow. It's going to take them a while, but that's the first thing to happen. We have tote or swag bags coming for them that'll be filled with their cap and gown and some other items. We'll have awards night virtually. There's a planned student parade at the high school on the day we would have graduated. So the staff will be socially distanced along the driveway and the kids and families will drive through. We've been working closely with Concord Police, and that's the direction they're sending us on any parade ideas. It's become a lot to manage every request for a parade through town. So we're hunkering down on our own space and bringing people through us, which will work out just fine. And then in terms of graduation, Mr. Mastrullo is working with a group of staff, parents, several of whom are from some of the key groups that support those events, including All Night Live and the Parents Association, and students. And after a survey was completed, there was by far a preference for an in-person graduation with students only, to be broadcast over Minuteman Media Network. So that's all in place. The real daunting question is what kind of timing would allow for that. So we've been consulting with other districts, with the Board of Health, obviously watching the governor's guidelines. We're just leaving it open-ended for the moment. We're hearing a handful of other districts, anywhere from one in June to a number of them out trying for dates in August. So that's the goal. We're being pretty forward with families and kids and parents as to, there's always this chance it won't happen and we'll have to go to a plan B, but for the moment, we're going to keep trying. So that's the graduation and class of 2020 update. And then two other more just housekeeping items as we make our way through the list of what we normally would be doing in the spring and what needs to be prepared for the fall as part of just, normal processes. Handbooks normally would come to you sometime in May or June. We're going to not make any changes to those handbooks and use them as is. We can always amend them at any point as the year happens. There's no huge legal mandate that we have to update or anything like that. So we're feeling comfortable about that. School improvement plans, we are going to, as most districts are, since school advisory councils aren't meeting, putting those sort of frozen in time. The principals are going to be doing written reports as to the status of the goals that they set, so we can share those. And then we'll be in the fall really looking at the priorities as we work through re-entry or more remote learning or both, and adjusting accordingly. So for this spring, those aren't going to happen the way that you're used to, but you'll definitely be getting updates as to where we left off. So those are highlights of some of what we've been talking a lot about. And the rest of what we've been talking about is throughout the agenda. So I just wanted to be sure I got those items to you.
Great.
Wally, if I might,
Yes.
something that I probably should have put into the reports section or liaison, and I'm sure Lori's aware of this, the recognitions for all the students and their volunteer work will be happening in a very uninterrupted way. The two volunteer group, the community volunteers that put together the Rotary Club Awards, the Concord Rec Awards, the Presidential Service Awards, and so on, have been hard at work. And although we've got alternate means of getting these awards to students, there's a very sound plan that those students will be properly recognized for the contributions they made around town.
That's great.
That's great.
As it should.
Hey, before we just kick right into our reports for discussion, can I tee it up for a sec, partially because of our timing today, and partially because I neglected something that I should have been meant to do before this, which was starting to put time estimates on our, again. I meant to do that for this week and apologize that I didn't, but I wanted to just kind of frame our discussion because we do have a hard deadline today. Since the superintendent's virtual coffee is at 3, I think we should all commit to getting off by 2:45 to at least give ourselves a little break before that, particularly hard. So that gives us, a little bit over, not quite an hour and a half now. So as we go into reports for discussion, I would kind of throw out there that maybe we aim for about 15 minutes per topic here, A through D, and then of course we have our any further discussion and vote on EDCO. If it goes a little longer and we need to, we can, but I think we just want to kind of keep our timing in mind as we go through things. So we just wanted to frame it that way, and hopefully we can kind of hit the big points on here. And actually what's not on the agenda is discussing our next meetings, and that needs to be done before we get off also. So as we're going through these, we can think about whether or not we've covered them completely or whether there's overflow and we need to meet next Tuesday. But that'll be up for us all to decide by the end of this meeting also.
Heather and Wally, do we have items for executive today?
We have one thing, but it could wait till Tuesday.
Okay.
And I think as we go through these items, if it looks like we're going to have discussion lengthier than the 15 minutes that Heather just described, we may just want to move that for Tuesday, because we'll have a little more open-ended time on Tuesday. We're starting at 5, and it'll almost seem normal, except we'll be doing this.
Except that it will have been only 4 days since the last meeting.
Yeah, except for all that.
We are going to meet in 4 days, by the way. Not a new thing.
All right. Okay. Anyway, all that said, thank you. Let's jump in. So, Lori, and maybe it's Kristen, I'm not sure who's running this, but if you were going to give us an initial update on phase 3 so far.
Yes. So Kristen is here, Director of Teaching and Learning, and Ruth Gruby, our Director of Student Services. We're just going to tag team a little bit. I'll open it up with context and share out some of the highlights we've been checking in over the last few days and hearing how things are going with phase 3. Obviously, the biggest change was, twofold, really. One was the structured Zoom scheduled sessions for all kids to varying degrees as we went from elementary to high school. And really, the second piece is the accountability and mandate that kids attend those sessions on top of the 20 minutes per course or subject that they're working through. I think overall, and this is really anecdotal today, we don't have data or survey data this quick in to bring to you. We're developing ways to gather that. Overall, I feel strongly that it's gone very positively. I think we've gotten kids into a structure that there was a real desire for and wish for, at least on their parents' part. We've had a little bit of feedback here and there from the kids about, gee, this was really great the way it was. So, but I think it's a nice balance, and we're accomplishing that. I think teachers are enjoying the FaceTime with kids a great deal. We're hearing positives about that, and the connections are happening as we had hoped. That was by far a high level goal for sure. We are hearing, and again, we don't have the data for you because it's just this week and it's Friday, that participation is considerably up from when it was presented as less mandated or more optional. So I think that's good news. We're seeing kids really engage. Those are my positives. I think that the challenges we're still hearing, and I just got off a staff meeting with one of the schools, and just the technology itself for teachers as they're navigating a new environment, setting expectations for kids, and really classroom management, which is such a strange phrase for me in this, but that's what it is. It's just totally different. Helping kids know what tools in the Zoom environment they can use, which ones maybe not to use. We're turning chat boxes off in some places. We this morning decided to make it so they can't change their names. For now, the backgrounds are still something they can fool around with. So if that doesn't slow down, we'll probably stabilize that as well. I think teachers are getting more comfortable and will continue to get more comfortable. And then, I think some of the questions I heard them talking about was just how to know who's engaged and how to keep kids engaged and that sort of thing. So that's a lot of work we can support them on, and they can support each other on, and will grow as they get more comfortable and more accustomed. So I think the positives there, that we are building the set of needs going into phase 4 and identifying them, and we'll be on a common page as this phase 3 and prior phases 1 and 2 build foundations for what that looks like. But I think overall it's been a really good week. I don't know if Kristen or Ruth want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yep.
Great.
Yes. So for phase 3, as Laurie said, there were those 2 changes, and also just an assurance about sort of the content that we're covering. And so let me just talk about each of the 3. The first big change was the live synchronous learning. And I think that a lot of our public equate that with learning, and that's a mistake. So the entire time we've been learning. So we have programs, online, we have software packages, teachers have been sending assignments. But I do think there's a piece where, since parents can't see the kids actually interacting with their teacher, they're not sure that they're learning. So the live synchronous learning is part of the learning package happening right now, but it's not solely the learning package that's happening right now. So what it does do is provide connections between the teacher and the students, and we've seen that long. And those are really what people are for. So particularly at the younger grades, preschool, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, we have been very clear with teachers that those 2 times a week that they're meeting with their students are really for social-emotional learning and connection. So they also provide another piece, which is a structured learning environment. So there's a certain time that kids have to go on, and that is working really well. Each of the levels, each of the schools had to coordinate to create schedules so that kids, different teachers and different classes wouldn't conflict with each other. So, for example, the high school is basically using a modified version of their in real life schedule, where Zoom classes are much shorter. than they would be in real life, because you don't have a lot of the passing time and that kind of thing that you might in another setting. So creating those schedules so that kids don't have conflicts, or there aren't conflicts at home with one computer, that's been the challenge, I would say, of this week, and it's worked out pretty well from initial reports. Overall, I would say people are really happy about those. We've had to, as Lori said, there's things to learn about classroom management for all teachers. People aren't used to working this way. So we've tried to provide a lot of professional development, but there's limited time for teachers to participate in professional development about how to do this as they're trying to do it. So we're hoping to move forward with a lot more professional development in that way, and delivered by our own educators, as we know works really well for Concord and Concord-Carlisle educators. So, and then the second part of it is that, especially at the secondary level, the middle school and the high school, attendance at the Zoom sessions and doing the assignments is mandatory. So, and that's been really clear. So we have, for example, at the middle school, a list that's created. It's called the Credit No Entry List, so that they are taking attendance, doing assignments through our normal system of Aspen grading book, and then putting it into this list so that we can see if there are kids who are having patterns of not being engaged or not doing the work. And so we can follow up individually with them. So individual teachers, guidance counselors, special educators, and administrators have all followed up to make sure that kids are attending. And this first week, it's been really good. We had both Mike Mastrullo, the head of the principal high school, and Andrew Namici, our head of our MECO program, report in a meeting today that they thought about 100% of kids were doing what they needed to be doing, or we had a really effective path to get them involved. So, so we're really excited about the mandatory attendance, and that kind of leads to the last piece about the content coverage. So the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education came out with prerequisite standards of content in math, reading, writing, social studies, and science that kids would have to learn before they went to the next grade level or graduated. And we are completely on pace. In fact, we're ahead of the game in all of those. So there's no reason content-wise why we would have to be nervous. Of course, we haven't achieved everything that we would have content-wise if we had been in school, but we are a good, I would say, 80% of the way there. And we have definitely achieved all of the prerequisite, or they're also called power standards. So we're really excited about that. Part of this work has been through individual work on software platforms like Lexia for reading, Raz Kids for reading, Dreambox, IXL, Delta Math for math, and so on. And we're happy to say that those programs will all be available to families over the summer. They are individualized based on what kids are able to do, so that they can continue working on them over the summer. So we're excited about that as well. So far, so good.
And I'll just add on to that, we're going to be sending home the list of prerequisite content standards that we're covering, as Kristen referenced. So that'll be going out to parents over the weekend in one of my daily emails here, so that everybody's clear on which ones we're covering all of them. So we're going to send them home, and then there's other things going on too. But that'll give a nice baseline, I think, for families as to what actually is being taught. I know we've had a couple of people ask, especially at the older grade levels, where they're not in Google Classroom with the kids, how do I know what they're doing? And hopefully that'll become a means of communicating that. Ruth, do you want to just talk special ed for a minute here?
Very, very, very briefly. I think the week went really well. I think the staff was very excited to expand their time with students, albeit, incrementally 15, 20 minutes per session, working with students and parents. They're working, the staff is amazing, and they're working with all the general educators, the related service providers. We're a little different because we're looking at compliance on IEPs. We're looking at phase 3.5, if you will, from an IEP standpoint, and we'll get on that, talk about that in a little bit. But from a related services standpoint, from a parent standpoint, it really does seem to be going. This week was smoother, I think, because of the scheduling, and I think because they had actual consistency in their transitions and consistency in the schedules. And middle and high school staff are knocking it out of the park as far as being a resource for the general educator in the content that's being taught there. And the elementary school staffs are awesome, working so collaboratively with each other for the betterment of kids. And so that's what I've seen this week. So I think, fingers crossed, we're going to go into the next 5 weeks continue to do what we're doing. That's all.
That's great. It certainly sounds like it's going very well 5 days in.
Let's hope. Yeah.
I just remembered something. In the last week, we've had a lot of great milestone events. So what we've tried to do is translate things that would have happened, field trips and so forth, that would have happened in real life when we were there in person, and into a virtual environment. So this week, we had at 2 of the schools, the other one happens next week, we had the Blandings turtle release back into the wild for our 4th graders. That was awesome. The one that I attended was the Willard School one, and where they had set, a have a heart trap a couple of hours before, and into that trap, before they were about to release the teeny tiny little Blandings turtles, they found a turtle. Blandings turtle was about this big, from Alcott School, that had been released in 2012, and they had put the notches on the shell so they could tell that the turtle's name was Bubbles and whose class it was. And I mean, it was very, very exciting. So the kids had fantastic questions about predators, and were we all going to release them in the same place, and so forth. Similarly, we have ordered caterpillars for all our 1st grade teachers to have at home, so that those students won't miss their growth and development unit from caterpillars to butterflies. So we're excited about that as well. So it may look like we're not in school, but actually there's a lot of nice learning going on.
Great. Ruthie?
That's great.
Ruthie, I wonder if
Yes.
you could explain a little bit more, just to help me get a sense of how members of the special education staff are, in some cases, teaching independently, some cases supporting regular ed, and some perhaps a hybrid.
Yeah, it depends on, I can definitely clarify. So it depends on what's on the child service delivery grid, and depends on on the service provider for that. So if we look at elementary school, we look at special ed teachers. If something is on the B grid, it's classroom support, so they would be in the classroom to kind of support the students along. But if it's on the C grid, it's a pull-out service, which would be it could be a math service or a reading service, which we're, as Kristen alluded to earlier, there are learning activities on the websites that we have on things along those lines that have been in phase 1 and phase 2. Right now, what's happening is, for those pull-out services, there are more time for the students to check in with a staff member to really work on, say there's an issue with spelling or reading or something along those lines. They may just do a little activity or something with them to get a student back on track. Speech and language is similar with social pragmatic groups, and that's usually a pull-out. That's on as well. They might get together and have a social group or a lunch bunch or something like that with some students, and that's at the elementary. So in the middle and high school, it looks a little differently, because although there are pullouts, they're generally going into a class to assist their disability. So if it's an executive functioning issue or a reading or writing issue, where they would in a typical day go into a classroom to have a lesson from the teacher is really, the student is getting their assignments from the general educator, because we're introducing some new content, and then they're helping those students organize it, work with it, and organize the writing through a graphic organizer, look at comprehension, helping them highlight things along those lines in the middle and high school. So that changed to the learning center model. Still getting the same results because some of the staff do go in the classroom, and honestly, Court, it really depends on the student's IEP and what's specifically on their individual ed plan.
But in terms of roles, responsibilities, relationships, notwithstanding the remote nature of it, it's been relatively unchanged.
Correct. And
Wow.
I think it's really great. I mean, the general ed teachers they're rock stars. They really are. They're doing an amazing job. And so the special ed teachers. But what I've seen is this community, it's very collaborative. And I think that's very good in this environment for kids.
Good. Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I just comment on what you said, Ruth? The saying that it's so different based on every child is really in of itself incredible right now. I mean, you would almost think that in an environment like this, to tailor education child by child like that would be impossible. So the fact that it depends so highly on each student is amazing.
I mean, what the DESE, the guidance, that has been a little delayed for us. So we've had to kind of figure things out while it's happening. But they still come with the guidance, which is fantastic. But the students, say, for example, they have 5 things on their grid. Whatever is the most pressing right now in this environment is really what we want to work on with the student. So, for example, a lot of kids can't access, they don't have the attention span for remote learning right now. They don't have the attention span for really looking at the computer and doing something, but they do have the attention span to make that connection, to make that social connection. And I think to Kristen's point about the social emotional learning, I think that's where right now we're just getting kids used to it and really gaining traction right now in phase 3.
Great. Okay, good. Any other questions from other committee members before we go on? I'm watching the clock more aggressively.
So I feel we'll have another report about this phase 3 before the end of the year, and you'll have more data.
Oh, definitely.
And so I'll reserve my questions till then.
Okay, yeah. And I would assume at this point, this is an interim report. If we meet again Tuesday, I don't think we'll be doing more on phase 3 at that point, because I don't think we'll know much more. 2 business days.
At least a couple weeks.
Full days later, yeah. Okay. Then Laura, let's move on to plans for summer.
Okay, so I'm going to frame this and then Kristen and Ruth can hop in. Just, I guess, like a lot of other things, we're in contingency planning mode. You'll remember that we always have offered a K-5 summer program for identified regular ed, special ed, and ELL students. Our plan is to move that forward, expanding the level of parameter for who we identify, especially in regular education, because we know of the gaps in learning here. Special education comes through the IEPs and is considered extended year services. Some of the things that we're debating and waiting on and planning for are variables that are conditions of the pandemic, obviously. So we know in the special education, the directive from the state, and this would apply to middle and high school as well, the directive from the state is to plan for in-person and remote and wait on the governor's decision process over the next 4 to 6 weeks. So we are actively doing that. Regular education, we have a lot more local control because it's not a mandated service. So we've been discussing really leaning toward a virtual option there. We think we can do better by choosing a direction rather than planning for multiple directions and having to switch gears. So that's part of our thought process, is to make the regular education services remote. And we wanted that to be part of the discussion today, was to see if we could talk with all of you and actually commit to that plan, or if you felt you wanted to leave it versatile for a longer period of time. I think in terms of other things for us to talk about in terms of summer, we're looking to offer educational opportunities to all kids. The middle and high school students will maintain their laptops. Normally they come to us at the end of the year. We will need to switch them out at some point or take them for a week, but we would leave them with the kids all through the summer. We've been discussing even today, really partnering with the public library to really motivate kids to partake in that, and then offering incentives for other kinds of summer work. So that's our current status. We're getting ready to roll out invitations to the kids and their families to what we're going to offer. So we're hoping for your feedback today before we do that. We're also in the process of securing staff, obviously knowing we, in some cases, have to ask them to be ready to do different things depending on how it goes. So we wanted to also have your input before we firmed that up with them today and make those offers to staff as firmed up as possible. So I think that's where we are. Kristen, Ruth, did I miss anything?
I can give a few more specifics for the general education. Yeah, about how it might work.
Great.
So in the past, our general education program is for students at the elementary level who have not met benchmark for reading. And so we have assessments, and we cut the cloth pretty widely. Looking at our list, our last assessment was given at the end of January, and we just set the benchmark. If you were at grade level or below, then we would be inviting you to summer school for reading. And so we feel like we have pretty good data. There's about 200 kids who qualify that way in kindergarten through grade 5. Also, we would like to invite all English language learner students. Actually, in some ways, they're the hardest hit in terms of learning what they need to learn, because they are normally not in English-speaking homes. So we would like to be able to give them direct instruction in speaking English. So normally, and I'll let Ruthie talk about the ESY, but the students who are on an extended school year for their IEPs. But normally what we would do with the populations that I just described is we would have 3 weeks of summer school, totally optional. It's up to the family. If they want a kid, they would get an invitation. It would be from July 6th, Monday through Friday, 9 to 12. So historically, in the afternoon, the kids have mostly gone to Concord Rec for sports activities in the afternoon. So what we'd like to do is be able to offer for our general ed and ELL students a virtual environment. We feel like with the time, we could plan well enough for that. And let me just give you a picture of what that could look like, although I haven't met with all the teachers and so forth. So what it could look like is what we call a station model, where the 3 hours every day are divided up into 4 45-minute segments. So one of those segments would be Zooming live synchronous learning with the teacher. So best practice in our literacy instruction, we use a program called LLI, Leveled Literacy Instruction. And best practice is that students are in groups of no more than 4, working with an individual teacher on their reading. So if you had a class of 16, maybe you would have a teacher would have 4 students at a time. So that's the tutoring portion. They would go through the curriculum by working with leveled books that are at their instructional. They'd work on fluency, they'd work on comprehension, all the pieces that they normally would work on. Then there's 3 other sort of segments of a morning. So one of those would be to continue with the online platforms that we already use and they're familiar with. Lexia and Raz Kids are in reading, and Dreambox or IXL or Delta Math and math. So that's the second. And then the third time period would be for work in literacy in a packet. So a physical packet that we would have to photocopy and deliver. They already exist. It's what we normally use by grade level and reading level in our reading program in the summer. It's all the materials from Foundations, which is our phonics program, and the LLI, the level literacy instruction, and then a few others on handwriting and so forth. So we want kids to be able to have a physical product. We feel like given this amount of time, if we make that decision, we can have those photocopied and delivered to them. So we're ready to roll on July 6th. Similarly, we would want the fourth segment of the morning out of 4 segments to be for math. And again, we have from our normal math program, Everyday Math, we have packets already made by grade level of what students would need to do. It is tremendously hard to do math online because it's so much figuring. So we'd love to give kids the tools that we know work for them. For example, one of the most common mistakes that kids make when they're learning math is it's hard to line up the numbers so that you're subtracting the 4 from the 3 above it that should be above it. So a really nice technique is to use graph paper. And so we would like to create those literacy packets, create those math packets physically, and then give them the time period to work on it every day. And then the next day they would check in with their teacher during their tutoring session on those packets. So that would further their learning in both literacy and math. So that's an idea of how it could run virtually. They would still be followed up with on the teacher, on Lexia and the packets, and they would have time with the teacher, but we wouldn't have to, for example, think about our 40-ish Metco students who usually come on a bus from Boston, including all of our incoming kids who are currently in preschool going to kindergarten. There's usually about 12 of them. We wouldn't have to think about putting them on a bus or social distancing or putting masks on them and so forth. How would they eat? And we would leave those bigger questions till the fall. So that's basically what a version of virtual summer school, an initial thought, could look like. I don't know, Ruthie, you want to add about ESY?
Yes. So thank you, Kristen. So similar to Kristen's schedule, if we go virtually, I was on a call just right before this call with Russell Johnson, who was the DES who was going to give us guidance on ESY today. And what he did say was they didn't have the guidance today. He was hoping to get it by next week. And for us to plan for both and, look at virtual, but plan for in-person as well. So that's a little bit more of a challenge. And Dr. Hunter and I have been where, we'd have to really look at that. I'm not sure, we have to look at from a staff standpoint, what classes, what children we would have. That's differently. The virtual one was easier right now to plan for until we get the guidance. So similarly, 9 to 12. Ours would be in 20-minute sections, though, because we would work with kids. And I have to look at what hasn't been delivered directly from March 13th to May 11th, and look at some of the services that may not have been delivered directly, which we're still providing, free and appropriate education in a least restrictive environment. But we want to make sure that students get what they have on their IEP to more of a degree. So I'm using the summertime and the special ed staff is to try to make up some of that time. So, for example, as a district, we went with Lexia, which is, with our dyslexic students, it's research-based. And that's where we went from an equity standpoint. Staff did not have the resources at home to teach. We couldn't just dole that out as a district. We had to really make sure that all kids were reached equitably. But in the summertime, we can, given the point that we can get into the building safely, we can get the materials to the staff members, and we would go from 9 to 12, but 20 minutes, and then 20 social emotional group, and then 20, like a social skills group, and then 20 minutes of math, and then back into writing. I mean, it would be like a 20-minute cycle. Definitely getting activities in there, definitely getting OT, speech, PT in there. So it's a little more complicated as far as the scheduling. But the director and I, the special ed, the summer school director and I spoke today, and we're looking at levels of students, grouping the students, and we're meeting next week to do that. So that's really where we're at from a virtual standpoint. If we were doing this in a hybrid standpoint, we would have to choose which students would be able to come to the school, the social distancing piece, what that would look like, masks, safety, all of that. And we have some students who truly cannot learn online. Some of our programs have some pretty vulnerable kids. So I'm leaning more towards that group being in the classrooms. But then is it safety? It's a lot to think about, and it's a lot to make sure that we do it. If we do it in person, we have to get it right. Because, obviously safety of our students is the number one priority. And that's something that Gloria and I haven't really breached yet, just tentatively. We're looking at that. So today we spoke, and, I'm going in that direction to see how we can do it, how many kids, how many staff members, and we'll wait for the guidance from the DESE, who he said probably by Friday or the following Monday.
So is it next Friday is what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
After Governor Baker talks on Monday, he said he couldn't preclude him today. So he was waiting for that, but they're still doing the guidance on it. They have not made any decisions. So they want us to plan for both.
Wow.
Yeah.
Offhand, I don't know the regular ed summer school, the special ed summer school budget. The regular ed one, I think, is something under $100,000. And we can assume, if I'm correct, that of those 200 students invited, we'd probably, if history repeats itself, see about 115 participate. Is that still a reasonable guess?
So we've been using as our guidepost for the cost, $75,000, including the director's salary.
Mhm.
And so in the past, we've always invited many, many more, sometimes even double the number of students that we get. And I just feel like I have no idea how many kids will actually say yes, because, for example, in the past, our ELL students who have been involved, often those families would go back to the country to visit where they're from. And so we would have, out of 100 kids, we would have maybe 20 that participate in summer school. But I don't think there's a lot of international travel happening this year. So it could mean that everybody wants to do it. Or, the other way, which is people are tired of online learning and they don't want to participate. So I just, it's hard to know until we send out those invitations and start getting people letting us know.
I heard your 3-hour plan, and I didn't hear the word recess.
No, in between each of them, there are in recess.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some fun ways to do that, but yeah.
Right. And what about incoming Metco students, brand new to the district? Are we at least keeping them on the radar in terms of some means of introducing and socializing before September, notwithstanding the fact that we don't know what September is going to look like?
Yeah, we're really, really lucky that we have very experienced kindergarten teachers who have run that program, and Metco staff that run that program for years and years very successfully. And I have incredible confidence in their ability to take the virtual environment and do the best job that they can. Of course, it won't be the same as bringing the kids into the school, which is part of our goal to orient them literally to the school and the bus ride. But I think the learning portion would definitely occur. Yeah.
And then just by way of a comment, we may return to it, and that is that we may hear a sentiment from some quarter that all students might benefit from some compensatory support this summer. Just going to
So
put it out.
we're anticipating that could be the case, and that's why we're actively looking at what we're going to offer for all kids this summer, which normally isn't something we do at such a large scale.
Yeah.
Both, we want to be sure there's opportunity there. We're trying to find that balance between offering opportunity and support to kids and abilities to engage, with the fact that some families just need the break. So that's the goal. What we've been looking at doing, rather than mandating summer work, is just providing some really strong incentives for kids, expecting that will encourage a lot of them to participate, to be punitive if you don't participate, but rewarding if you do. Whether that's homework pass is the one I've always used, and it frankly is pretty powerful, that if kids know they can get a couple of nights, get out of jail card in their pockets, they'll engage. So I think our primary goal is we keep kids reading this summer and maintain their, so that the math and some of the others don't regress. So that's the hope. I think to try to put anything bigger and more formal in place, I think I'd rather spend my time focused on making sure the September start accommodates all of the curriculum gaps. And I think we're in a better place to make sure all kids are reached at that point. But you've already heard we've adjusted the thresholds for invitations to K-5. And I think we're going to be a little bit fluid here. You asked about the budget. 75,000 is the budget. This is a great example of, we need this to play out longer to really know what we need for funds. And we're going to do right by as many kids as possible. So trying to balance all of those needs.
So I know we're short on time again. So it sounds like you're pretty sure that you will have some guidance by a week from Monday?
You talking to me? Yes.
Anybody?
Yep.
Right.
Well, I'll have guidance from the DESE on the special ed, what they're requiring us for, what their guidance is for this ESY for special ed. Yeah.
And we have local autonomy outside of that. Is that correct?
Yes. So yes. And I guess the other deliberation here is, I think the governor's statements Monday will give us some, as Ruth mentioned, some foreshadowing.
So in the absence of that, do you feel like you really need to do something before next week, or?
The regular ed, that is locally controlled. I would really like to get the invitations out and start knowing what we're telling the staff, if possible. Just, I think what we've learned over the last 2 months, if we can make some decisions and keep some things moving, even varying paces, it just helps us keep up. So that was my hope, was we might be able to commit to the regular ed side today. We can obviously revisit Tuesday if you'd like to. It looks like, because they're portioned off in terms of control, we don't have to have them sync up. I guess I'll add a little bit to that. I don't feel totally prepared to bring kids back to the schools, because when we get to the phase 4 conversation, you're going to see the list of things we're trying to have to decipher for what makes a safe environment for kids. Obviously, if special ed, you need to bring them back, then we will have to figure that out. But I would rather do that on the smallest scale possible, because of the huge implications and huge numbers of factors we have to figure out. So.
Okay, so it sounds like you're pitching this, I'll say, to staff as a remote learning model.
For regular ed, yes.
Correct.
That's the plan.
And that would probably influence participation in some way, because maybe people with small children would feel like that would be a challenge.
It might, yeah.
So, okay.
Well, and also, I have a history with extended day learning around here. The partnership with Concord Rec was not a small part of synergy that made these programs work. And so parents are going to be making decisions not about one program, but often about 2 programs.
Yes, and Concord Rec's already reached out to me. They're doing the same contingency planning that we are. And I actually think there's benefit to us making a virtual decision, what they're considering, if they're allowed, is spreading their camps out. And they were already asking if we might have more space for them in order to have as many kids as possible participate, if that comes to be. So I actually think, Court, that it might be beneficial for us to make a decision so that we can inform them. We definitely need to be working together. So.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Well, if you need that kind of direction from us today, there are two things. One, I will weigh in quickly that I would personally, my opinion would be, I would be more comfortable with us making the decision to stay remote for the summer anyway, given the risks of getting kids back together in person and the spikes we've seen in some places where that doesn't happen, et cetera, et cetera. And just the uncertainty. And like you said, all of it would have to happen in order to make an environment safe to come together in person. July is very soon. That would be a very short time frame to do that. So personally, I feel comfortable with the recommendation to just decide that regular ed summer school is virtual. And then my next question would be to the rest. Is everybody else comfortable with giving an opinion on this and giving the superintendent our support or not on this question today so that she can go and execute, or do we need to revisit it Tuesday?
I would say, Heather, thank you. I would say we support the decision, and we're going to revisit it anyway because we're revisiting everything, but because things are moving fast. But this is within our domain, and the likelihood of public health considerations changing so dramatically that an opening that would squeeze this into what's already going to be a home for special ed and a rec department that needs more space is very, exceedingly unlikely. So we'll revisit it, but I think a decision today makes a lot of sense so that the team can move forward planning it.
Yep, I agree. And I'm just wondering if the participation level might be higher than before, but who knows?
Yeah.
It's a great question, Cynthia. Yeah, we're really interested to find out what people are hoping for.
Yeah.
Just a side note, we have really celebrated and been enriched by the teachers in our summer school. They are our teachers. So we don't hire anybody from outside, and they're a really outstanding veteran group of teachers. We get super wonderful results. I have so much confidence in their ability to figure this out for our most vulnerable learners. I really do. And I want to protect their health as well. So I really thank you for your decision. I think everybody would feel better with it, more settled. And so they could start to think about how to move forward in a way that would be most powerful for students.
Okay, great. Wally, you're on board too?
Oh, yeah. I think it's just the last thing that Kristen just mentioned, I think, is critical to the process here. It's not that far away. And, the percentage opportunity to do something directly is so limited. Why even spend the time on it?
Right. Okay. And that was K5. So that's all of us. Okay. So that gives you what you need, Lori, to move forward with this, right?
Yes. And then we'll bring you updates on special ed. I just want to go on record as saying, if it were up to me and I was ready to make this recommendation, Ruth will tell you this story. I was really ready to make this recommendation, and she's grabbing me quick as Desi's telling her that I don't have the authority to make it. I personally think the special ed programs should be virtual also, but we need to wait that out and see how that goes. And if the law says we need to be in person, we will do it safely and productively. But I think to your decision making now, we know that's on a different scale. It's not hundreds and hundreds of kids. It's, appropriate kids to the summer services. So thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks. All right. Then unless there's any more on summer, we can start to talk about fall.
Yeah. And this obviously one segues a bit into the other because some of the topics overlap each other. What I was hoping that this conversation today could focus on is really our approach to planning for the fall, not the actual plans themselves. So I offered everyone a few thoughts on paper as to a strategy for this. Even as the last 2 weeks have gone on and I've done more and more time with my colleagues, more and more time reading some of the documents that are being produced by various groups, more and more time really watching what's happening in the other countries that are opening up. And then even DESE coming out with the structure of the group they're going to have to make their guidance, to create their guidance for us. It was very similar in makeup of the stakeholders at the table. So that was validating. And obviously, we're going to want all those pieces to come together. DESE's certainly a driving force. I think a little bit to the same theme we just had, which is the timing of the guidance may be the challenge. I guess if there's one thing I'm becoming more comfortable with, all of those various entities are starting to have some very common threads to them in terms of that needs to happen. So that feels comforting. Comforting is the wrong word, but it's confirming that the list of things we need to talk on and figure out is not widely discrepant depending on the resource. It's about how many kids are at school. It's about how you provide for them in transportation, food service, all of the normal ways you just logistically manage a school. Obviously, it's about the learning and the blended piece that needs to be in place for that, because we'll be coming and going, potentially even either coming and going in large group as an aggregate school population, or just coming and going because we're staggering how kids are at school. All of those things. So, really it's three pieces we need to plan. And this part is consistent among all the resources we're watching. One is full reentry in the fall, which I'm getting more and more skeptical is very unlikely, where everyone's there, but we're operating differently and in a socially appropriate way with hygiene. The second is more of some of us are at school, and that obviously has a lot of pieces for us to talk about and figure out how it gets concluded and structured, while some kids are operating remotely and the switching of that and how that plays out. And then really the third, of course, is that we're still working remotely. So I was proposing a number of topics, and this list is by no means complete, but I'll just say it all out loud since it's already fairly long and it's just going to grow. The curriculum pieces, which Kristen's been mentioning, and looking at what next year's scope and sequence needs to be. The blended learning, which is about really robust in-school and remote learning that's really fluid. So we're on track for a solid academic year despite the conditions. Milestones and special events, that includes field trips and other things like that. Calendar, which is just straight up, when are we where? And then schedules, which does get into some of the staggered options of 1 week on, 1 week off, alternating days, half days, swapping, making our way through those options. Social distancing, which really is about the space in the building so that kids are able to keep 6 feet or approximate apart at all times. Huge implications, as I don't need to tell you, that really touches everything that we do, whether it's classrooms, hallways, recess, lunch. The list is pretty much everything. Safety practices, which include some of the other pieces to that in terms of hygiene and hand washing and all of that. Facilities and cleaning is the actual maintenance and cleaning of the buildings themselves and the frequency and the processes we're going to use. Food service, that's everything from if kids aren't eating in the cafeteria, how do we operate, to what and how we prepare food safely, everything connected to that. Transportation does not stand in isolation to some of these other topics, but it is a huge entity in and of itself. It is also such a driver in equity that it has to be forefront in the conversation, because a lack of transportation can create a huge void for a lot of kids. So how do we figure that out? Obviously, social distancing on a bus, you don't even have to describe to see the challenges. Health services, and by that I was referencing certainly the nurses and the role that they have, which is already, we saw this happen even before school closed in the role they were playing. But also beyond that are we taking kids' temperatures? Are we doing other types of follow-up, isolating when there's a case? All of what's related to that. And is it just the nurses? Do we need other people involved? And if it is just the nurses, do we have enough support there? So all aspects of that. One of my many hopes is that we get some decision-making protocols in place this summer. I would really far rather have the flow charts of if this happens, then this is going to happen, rather than figuring things out on the fly. If we get a positive case, what happens next is already defined and not something that we're reacting to. And that's just one example of the many possible scenarios that I would hope we could brainstorm and process and have expectations on. Community partnerships, this goes to Court's point. We are very interconnected to a number of community organizations. The two that are immediately obvious to me are Concord Rec and Concord Children's Center, one we share children with and the share space with. Communication of all kinds and shapes, both internally with the community, that whole process and how, and making sure our structures are intact for that. And the list gets longer. We brainstormed some others even since I proposed this. So what I suggested here, and this is really the discussion that I'd hoped for today, was an advisory group forming that could sit as the umbrella to what then would have all these working groups underneath it. So there's an ebb of the detailed work coming back to the advisory group, but the advisory group bring a really wide-ranging group of people who really knows what's going on in all facets of the planning. One, to make sure that there's no contradiction to each other, but also to make sure that they support each other and that we're not getting off in different directions. And because we're talking about kids, we need to be sure, I think, too, the makeup of the committee that I'm about to go into, that we're all finding some common ground here. I think this is going to be really challenging. Safety of kids, there's nothing more sensitive than that, between, sharing kids at school with staff and how it's for them, but, parents entrusting us with them. And the fact that I think it's going to be really hard to find a place where every parent feels safe in this early stage, and respecting that and working through that too. So this was the membership I was thinking off the first pass. This is up for discussion, certainly. Certainly school committee representation, parent representation at each level, the leaders, the administrators of the district level and the 5 building principals, the managers in food service facilities and transportation, the school nurse leaders from each district. I've noted them as CTA and CCTA representatives, that those are the teachers, 2 high school students, the Board of Health director. And I also added a local professional infectious disease expert, because I've been communicating with a few who live in town, many of their parents often. And I just think having another professional at the table who does this as an area of expertise would be really beneficial. I know just by email, it's been beneficial to have them help process some of what we all are bombarded with for facts, and hear their professional opinions. So that's what I've outlined for discussion. I think that's where I turn it over to you for feedback and brainstorming, and whether this feels like the right direction, or if you want to come up with another way to approach it. I'm craving the planner and type A in me is craving some structure and process. So this is me trying to offer a way to do that. But it's certainly up for feedback and alternate ideas.
Well, who wants to jump in? I'll jump in quickly and say I completely agree with this idea. I think an advisory committee makes sense. I think it's great to include 2 school committee members. It looks like Eva has something to say too. I was going to bounce it out quickly anyway. Eva, what did you want to add?
I totally agree with this approach. I just wanted to add one more maybe representative that I'm sure can be sourced from the community. I think there are civil engineers, right, that are responsible for designing ventilation and things like this. So having people that have they have careers in that that they can advise would be useful, as it's an airborne problem.
You're saying a civil engineer who designs
Yes,
installation type systems?
Yeah, so Dr. Laurie Hunter, she mentioned that she's already speaking to seems like doctors in infectious diseases, but getting a couple engineers maybe in the community there, they're dealing with with that part might be a useful advisor to the committee.
So I just have I think there's an omission. We should have a CPAC representative on there.
Thank you. Yeah, no, this list is not complete. So thank you.
And then I'm concerned about us putting so much energy into building a unique plan, even though we are our own town, a district, because, Riley will have his pretty similar kind of group. And I assume that's starting up or has started up. There's going to have a couple of groups that are going to provide guidance. I hope they're consistent. What are peer districts doing regarding this?
Yeah, and actually, that's a great question. I've been meeting with them, and many of them are getting this kind of an advisory group together, expecting that it does need to complement and be driven by the state level guidance. Unfortunately, what I heard yesterday from one of the superintendents who's sitting on the commissioners group is that they aren't likely to release any guidance until the end of June. They've met once and are just really getting up and running. Through the Superintendents Association, I know the message is getting to the commissioner very loudly and clearly that we're craving that guidance sooner. So certainly the hope is that it's sooner. In the meantime, there's at least a cohort of us who are talking regularly and often and sharing information for exactly the reasons you just said. We don't want to all rebuild this ourselves. So at minimum, we'd start to have some district commonality and shared thinking. Again, I would be the first to say, give me the state guidance, and that's what we'll run with. It just seems like the timing might be a little slower than what I'd hope. So, yeah.
I also think even with the state guidance, whatever that is then has to be translated into our day-to-day and our execution, what it looks like. So even once we have that guidance, I feel like a group like this would be valuable to say, okay, now we know that the state has said we have to do X. What does that look like in Concord and in Concord-Carlisle? So I feel like this would be valuable even with that guidance.
Obviously, they're not going to say, okay,
Oh, Cynthia, you went mute.
I know they're not going to say, okay, here's the exact plan for Concord or Carlisle.
Right.
Yes, I get that. Just to be respectful of time, because we do have another big topic and topics coming up.
Yeah.
Is it possible at our next meeting we can discuss how the school committee, outside of the two members, to participate? And the one thing that we are not talking about in this committee is the budget and the implications for our budget, and keeping an eye on all these moving things that are just going to be changing so much over May, June, July, August. So maybe we can give you
I'll just give you my 2-second intention there, and then that obviously needs to get talked about. My intention was that this advisory group would make recommendations that would get brought to the whole committee for discussion and decision making, really up at the committee level. Advisory really being advisory, that decisions would not get made there, but be brought to you as a whole group. And then, yes, we got to put all the budget pieces into it as well.
I like what you put together. I think this really suggests that the last conversation we had about this very topic really stuck, that we need to get the people in the room, even if we don't have the exact charge to put in front of some group. We need to have the communication mechanisms in place. In terms of participation, I would suggest that we put yet another one on, and that is somebody who represents the LEPC. That's the Local Emergency Planning Committee. that would bring in public safety and Emerson and a few others.
Good point.
At least give people the option to get elbows on the table with this group.
Yep. Great.
So I think we should note that the charge is implied, but would get much more concrete as we go along and would reflect state.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I have a quick question for Dr. Hunter. I hear that a lot of superintendents are forming these task groups. Is there a space where those task groups can share information with each other and with the state, with DESE? So we guidance that is driven by the needs of the schools and communities.
Mm-hmm. At this point, it's happening through the superintendent's roundtables, and MASS is sitting in on those roundtables. And then when the executive board meets with the commissioner, which is happening frequently and often, the feedback's going right up that line. In fact, I watched that happen yesterday. Within a few hours, they met with us at noon, and they were talking with him at 3. So I think right now that's the structure. I don't know if that'll be the best or long-term structure, but that's how it's happening currently. Great question.
So what would this look like? Would this look like a more formal membership and then outreach and appointments at subsequent meetings? I'm asking the chairs.
Yeah, I was just going to say, my question is, are people comfortable appointing 2 of us today to serve on this, once it's created?
Lori, do you want it that fast or?
Yeah, if you're ready. If you're not ready, that's fine. If this feels like the right direction, I would love to get the membership process started and start to really get some discussions going. But Tuesday's fine too. I mean, we're meeting in 4 days, so that's fine.
Yeah, I think we should put it on as a vote and on Tuesday.
Yeah, and I would say if you are interested in serving in one of those 2 spots, then shoot an email to Heather or me or both.
That sounds good.
Just, if there are 2 people, that makes the vote on Tuesday pretty easy. I suspect this will be a significant piece of work, and that's off to any of us who are willing to take that on.
I'll take my hat off, do you?
Okay.
Okay, good. Then does that kind of cover what you wanted to get out of this for today, Lori?
It does. And then obviously there's a lot more to talk on, and I want to be sure we've heard the committee's thoughts on the process and how we go about things, so we can continue that on Tuesday as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, this seems to be move that forward to Tuesday.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good.
We move to the budget.
Yep.
Anybody want to buzz Jared there and wake him up?
112 budget. Jared, you're up.
Don't worry, I keep an eye on it.
Budget. So in your packets, you saw that I wrote a couple memos. I'll start with the CPS side. Laurie, myself, Harry LaFleur, and Stephen Crane met earlier this week. So we just went over sort of the 1/12 process. So starting with CPS, the way that the 1/12 works, we are a department of the town at the pre-K through 8 level. Therefore, they do all of the submittals to the state and all of that. We will work with them on our numbers, our run rates, and everything. But at this time, I expect a 1/12 budget based on FY20's amount. So if that holds true, in your memo, you can see that my 5-year average, sort of the monthly allowance, the monthly expense is about 2.3 million, and we're going to get roughly 3.3 million per month. So I don't think we should not have any issues paying all of our expenses at the CPS side. At the Concord-Carlisle side, it's a little more in-depth.
Jared, do you want questions on CPS first?
Sure. Yeah, please.
How does this reflect the shared budgets, or is that an independent conversation? we have common budgets with the town for certain insurance accounts and things. Like
So
that?
insurance on the pre-K through 8, all of that, unemployment, OPEB, those are the town's budget.
Correct.
So we don't pay that out of the CPS. So it does not impact that general fund budget.
Oh, no, I understand that. I know. I'm simply saying you and the town are looking at that shared budget, and then Carrie and company are looking at just the strictly the town budget.
Correct.
So we've basically got 3 pieces of the puzzle, if you will. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, between the two, we have between the 3, Concord and the Concord-Carlisle budget is about 68% of the town's overall budget.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they're looking into their run rates, what expenses they may have in the summertime that we may not, and where further conversation to be had.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to recognize, though, that things like OPEB and unemployment are not part of our CPS budget. They're, they really are a town budget item. And unlike at the region, where they're actually part of our budget. So I think, I don't want us to go away thinking there are really 3 budgets. There are aspects of compensation primarily for CPS employees that the town handles extent of CPS budget.
Yep. Any more questions on the CPS? No. Okay. So the region is a bit different. So we're still getting guidelines. There was one that came out last week. There was another one that came out. There's one that came out on, I want to say, April 23rd. And there was a follow-up Q&A to all the 112th region questions yesterday, and I'll send that along. I was just able to review it this morning. But what we need to do is we need to basically apply for the 112th budget to Commissioner Riley. We need to submit all of our FY20 assessments, FY20 budget, FY21 assessments, FY21 school committee voted budget, what we have done with the towns, trying to, work with the town meetings, if they're pushing that off into September, which it seems like they are. So all of that stuff, we need to submit that to the to DESE by the 1st of June, and then he sets the 112th budget, which I expect to be no less than the FY20 budget. Something, though, that we need to keep in mind is they're going to use the most recent state aid numbers, and that may affect the monthly assessments. And we don't know, I can guess at that, but until those numbers come out, I don't want to take a guess. I want to assume we are getting the same 1/12 final budget, but when it comes to the assessments, it's not going to be apples to apples what it was in FY20. It will be close, but he's going to use the most up-to-date state aid numbers. In addition, what we need to do is, because per our regional agreement, there's 2 formulas that they use to do assessment. The statutory formula, which the state uses, and an alternative assessment formula, which we use. It basically has to do with the net school spending and how we assess the 2 towns. What we need to do is I need to submit a letter to the 2 select boards and just have them approve that we are in fact still using the alternative assessment formula. And that needs to be part of my package to the state. So that's a letter that I'm working on. I will have that by the Tuesday's agenda to get out. It doesn't necessarily have to be a vote. They really haven't said it has to be a vote. A vote would be preferred. But they have to recognize that we are using the alternative assessment. So to further on at the CPS level, take a look at my my memo. We, based on the 1/12 budget, we expect to get about 2.9 million per month. If you take a look at our run rates, I expect that not to be an issue at all. I stated recently in past meetings that we do have some assessments starting in January, but if we do not have a budget before December 1st, the commission is going to step in anyway. So I do assume that we will have a budget by December 1st, and the commissioner would not have to step in, and we don't have to worry about any of the debt issues in the cash issues. I'm not necessarily anticipating that, but I just want to clarify what I said in the past regarding December debt. Also in the memo, I just sort of explained the difference between the alternative assessment method as well as the statutory assessment. And then further on, I did have the April 23rd guidance memo from DESE. They did update that with a Q&A that was sent over to me yesterday. I will send that out. I'm pretty versed now in how this will all work, so I can definitely take questions. If there's something that I don't know, I can certainly clarify that on Tuesday. But if you do have questions on the 112, how it works, how town meeting works, how if one votes a budget and the other doesn't, etc., I'm very happy to answer.
One thing that David had touched on this at the opening, relative to town meetings, and there's a mechanism that if Carlisle votes a budget, and then we're doing 112, and they're assessed based on the 112. Once Concord passes a budget, if it is at or lower than Carlisle's, then Carlisle, there'll be an assessment adjustment, and we can move forward. Carlisle wouldn't have to get another special town meeting together. So I think we want to, obviously we're going to pay attention to what Carlisle is thinking about for their town meeting, but there needs to be some discussion about it. I don't know, David, if I thought I heard you say, excuse me, that Carlisle was thinking about not voting a budget at town meeting for the region. And I don't know.
The Carlisle FinCom met last night. Melissa was there. She reports to me that they voted the 112. I didn't ask her, is that 112 for region, 112 for, but I mean, I honestly don't see a scenario where that body can go through each department, make adjustments, set new guidelines, notwithstanding the mechanics of a town meeting. So I think they're going to get to where they're just slower to get there. Concord got. So certainly for the region, there was absolutely, at least in the meetings I was in, there was no appetite to go, back to the old guideline or go any other direction other than follow Concord's lead on either not moving the article or agreeing with the 112. So I think that issue goes away in terms of there won't be a situation where there'll be a different voted budget. That's not going to happen. It's increasingly likely, in my opinion, that it'll look like Concord. There'll be either no town meeting or a very spare town meeting with some, minimal articles, and then push it all to the phone. I mean,
so then it's the second town meeting.
Yeah, but that said, again, what Melissa's reporting is at the FinCom level. It's got to go up to the selectman level, and I don't think it's to that level yet. So maybe, she's just giving the feedback of what happened last night in the course of a series of meetings that FinCom has had. FinCom is meeting, I think, twice a week. You think you have it bad, right? So, so they're pretty proactively on, this whole process.
Yeah. Good. Okay.
So that's what I know. Anyway.
Thank you.
So Jared, what is the, do we use the 2021 enrollment?
We will use the October 1st, 2019 numbers.
So that's a known number. I was just wondering if enrollment has changed at all. Are we getting new students enrolling?
I can answer that since the registrations would be coming through my office now. We aren't right this minute. We've had a couple of new kids approach us, and with the remote environment, it's interesting, but we are not right now in any numbers.
Okay. And then if Concord and or Carlisle's receipts drop more, I would look at Concord. It's a bigger risk than what we're modeling, which is, I guess, is based on the budget. So if Concord's receipts dropped, they're saying 2.3 now. They began dropping by 5. And I'm not talking property taxes. I'm talking about meal room, that kind of tax. I assume we would have to make an adjustment of some kind.
You talking about, yes. So the school committee would, well, you would, if you're going to adjust, you would vote a new budget, and then it would go to town meeting. If town meeting fails, you can either reduce it, or you would go back and there would be another town meeting. So you would, if the budget fails, you can, in theory, reduce it, or you would go back again with that same number and have a revote. But you can reduce your budget number up until the vote.
We have allocated a 1/12 budget. We don't have to spend the 1/12, correct?
Do not, and I don't think we won't.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think one of the benefits of this extension of town meeting is we will have much more information now, and to make the decision about what to do with the budget. So both not just Concord receipts, but national data and state data should help us make some adjustments, understand what to make adjustments for, and we'll understand better. I mean, if we wait till September, we'll be into the school year, and we'll know, which approach and the costs of that approach, be differences in the budgets. We would be voting. So,
and I think by that time too, both the town and the school districts will have a better idea of what stimulus money and things that are coming to offset this that will help improve numbers that we can use to offset.
All right, so I'm going to continue to be the clock police today. It's 2:40. We do still want to take an EDCO vote. I think we want to get that done. Are there any other urgent questions, though, on the budget before we wrap that up? Okay, hearing none. Then I think we're good. The other thing I just want to touch base on that before we move on. Are people comfortable with the budget discussion enough that we're done with it for now and we do not need to add it to Tuesday's overflow agenda?
No, I just assume that Jared will build a 1/12 plan for the region. Would we talk about that before it's submitted?
It doesn't need any official votes, but I will prepare the packet and everything and whatever you all would like me to do.
when would that be submitted?
Yeah, why don't you prepare it and then bring it to the committee?
Yep.
When is it due, Jared?
Before June 1st.
Well,
they
great
have
we're
not
meeting,
sent-
it'll be fine.
Just so you know, they haven't even sent, as of sent out the form yet.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
going to
was
be the
on-
tricky part.
Yeah, but I have submitted this form before. I know everything that needs to go in it. The only thing that I'm have not completed yet is just that letter to the select boards.
So let us get our hands on the process and get the paperwork from Desi, and then definitely do our best to get it to you before it's submitted.
And there's no reason we can't just, where's the process come Tuesday if they send us some stuff Monday?
Mm-hmm.
No change.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, Heather, my thinking about your question is that we should have some of the basic placeholders on every agenda. And if we have updates, we can discuss them. And if we don't, we don't, because we can't overstate how unprecedented this situation is. We don't want to have agenda protocol preclude public conversation if we have new information. Let's
Yeah.
just get the basics on every agenda, and if we can skip over them, we skip over them.
Okay, that sounds good.
If others are in accord.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay then, thank you all. And moving on, let's move to action items. So, oops, I don't have the.
I have a motion in front of me. Why don't I read it and then we can talk about it?
Great.
Can I have a motion for both districts that, or do we have to separate these? The region's a member too, isn't it?
Yeah, I would separate them because not only are you both districts separate, but I actually have 2 votes. So I think really cleanly separate would be smart.
Well, in that case, I would move that the Concord Public Schools withdraw from EDCO Collaborative as of July 1st, 2020, and to grant the authority of the superintendent and legal counsel to negotiate a withdrawal from the EDCO Collaborative. And I would accept the motion that the Concord-Carlisle Regional School Committee withdraw from the EDCO Collaborative as of July 1st, 2020, and to grant the authority to the superintendent and legal counsel to negotiate a withdrawal from the EDCO Collaborative.
So
I will move that for the region. This is Heather.
I'll move that for the CPS district.
And we need a second for CPS.
Second for CPS. This is just for Concord Public Schools, right?
I actually moved that one, so we
Yeah.
just need a second. And then we need a second for the region. Heather moved it, we need a second for the region.
Cynthia just did, I think, but you're muted.
Okay, good.
We couldn't hear it.
Second for the region.
Thank you. So, discussion on this, we've talked about it.
Yeah, quick review. This means if we withdraw July 1, we're effectively a member through fiscal 21. There's a 1-year runway, and then we actually depart. So we'll have financial obligations that are known, and then these liabilities that are not fully known yet.
Correct.
Okay.
And also to clarify, there's some chance that over the course of the year, there will also be a dissolution or dissolvement of this, of EDCO, but that's not really in process yet. So we're kind of moving out ahead of that.
I'll just give you a quick update on that. I know Lexington's intent is for that. There's a little discussion over whether the right paperwork has been processed to the board. But I expect we will have a vote of termination of the institution June 30th.
Okay.
Is there any discussion about liabilities that could conceivably go beyond the membership for next year and the indebtedness of the organization?
There's lots of discussion of the indebtedness of the organization and the liabilities of the member districts. Whether you're a member, whether you've decided to stay in or still working through those decisions. Termination is when the process requires, per the collaborative agreement, that all that auditing be done so that we're all very clear about each district's liability. Just a brief comment that there's been some discrepant legal input as to whether we are liable or not. Our attorney reviewed it and is quite sure that we are liable because just like it says in the agreement about liability when you withdraw, she feels given that it's mentioned there, then it would certainly be referenced upon termination. So there's a lot to play out here. The part I wish was the other way around was the vote to terminate has to happen before the fiscal auditing happens to indicate to each what they're going to be responsible for. So that decision gets made in that order. Obviously, us withdrawing will also trigger that process for our districts. So.
Okay, and then one other piece, you've said it in so many words, might as well make it explicit. We're not going to hear from you a recommendation to move to some alternate provider. We don't need to.
The services that EDCO's been really mostly providing to us have been professional development, which certainly there's been value there. If EDCO somehow does exist, we can always participate as non-members if their programming is of benefit to us. We have a lot of other options, and Kristen's done an amazing job of building out those options. So I don't see that there's a chasm here we can't fill. The other settings are about special education, and currently we don't have any students in those settings. They are not. This is a little indicative of how we got here. Perhaps they are not our first go-to settings generally. So we're fine, I think. Thank you for asking. I think that's an important piece to say out loud. This is just, I have to state my regret in just public. I think this is an organization that has a 50-year life that these both of our districts have been very closely connected to, and very proud to be closely connected to. And even those of us making really hard decisions very much wish this was not where we were. But as your fiscal officers of both of these districts, I can't in good faith recommend anything other than withdrawal. And if termination's on the table, I will have to vote that way too. So.
Yeah, and just as a matter of historical record, this organization helped to fund through a grant-administered program that it operated, didn't use district monies from members, nonetheless helped support the town of Concord in the acquisition of the Henry Thoreau House up the road from your office, Lori. Now, they had designs on it. They wanted it to become an education center, and that didn't come to pass EDCO's way. But nonetheless, they've been our benefactor in other ways, this being one of them. So, yeah, it is sad.
Mm-hmm. It is.
I'd just like to clarify one thing as you describe the liability. By withdrawing, I don't think we are creating a scenario where we would be liable for any more than we would be if we stayed in. In fact, we're likely to be liable for less.
It's all based on the percentage of enrollment of each district across versus the aggregate. So that is solid and won't change. Yeah, it's all based on the membership districts and our proportion of that.
Yeah. Good. Anything else on this?
No, I'll continue to keep you posted. Obviously, withdrawing and then the termination possibility are similar impact to us, but pretty different in terms of impact to EDCO as a group. So I'll keep you posted.
That would be great. Thanks.
And so any other questions from the committee on the EDCO piece? So I guess we would move the executive session to Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's take that vote. We need to do that vote by roll call.
To not have it?
EDCO.
No, to withdraw from EDCO. We got our
All right, sorry.
motion in second. We haven't actually voted.
Okay.
So let's do to Lori's point, let's do these separately.
Go ahead.
We moved it for Concord. So for Concord, Johnston,
Aye.
Booth,
Aye.
Rainey,
Aye.
and Bout aye. So it passes unanimously.
And for the region, Mustafi? Is Eva still here? Modell?
Aye.
Mustafi, aye.
Thank you. Booth?
Aye.
Rainey?
Aye.
Aye.
Johnston, aye.
Okay. Thank you all. And so executive session, we will move to Tuesday. I don't think we don't need a motion to
No.
not have it.
Okay. So we do need a motion to adjourn and roll. So a motion to adjourn for the region.
So moved.
That for both?
Rainey for both, and Booth will second for both.
Okay. Thank you.
So Modell,
Aye.
Mustafi,
I think she said aye.
on language. We got Rainey,
Aye for both?
Booth,
Aye for both.
Aye for both.
Johnston, aye for both.
All right. Thank you all. Take an 8-minute break, and Lori and whoever else goes, we'll see you in a few minutes on the on the virtual coffee.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.